Welcome back to some new r/PettyRevenge stories, where people share small victories over those who wronged them. I hope you had a great day. Thanks for all the likes and comments on the last video. And now, let's start with the first story. It's called Sensitive Data. I work an office job managing finances for a European company. There's a colleague, a single woman in her late 40s or early 50s, who tends to be, let's say, overly critical. She often judges everyone about everything, whether it's how to do their jobs, their personal choices, their personalities, or even what they wear. Recently, with the economy being tough, the work environment has become tense. The added pressure has led to a lot of friction within the team, with complaints flying in all directions, mostly coming from her. One of her many complaints about me was that I wasn't protecting sensitive data properly, because I saved our monthly reports on our shared drive accessible to the team. Now, this system has been in place for decades before I even joined, and no one ever raised any concerns about it. In fact, this sensitive data has often been printed out and stuck on walls for reference. Normally, I just ignore these complaints and continue with my work. My boss and I are good at filtering out unnecessary noise when there's no real substance behind it. But this time, I decided to go for some malicious compliance. I implemented a new system. Every single file with remotely sensitive data is now password protected with unique passwords. This means she now has to keep track of a list of passwords for every file she wants to access. As an added bonus, my boss and I agreed that some data, like the budget for her department's operating expenses, is no longer appropriate for her to view. Now, if she needs that budget information, she has to provide proof of the related costs. Otherwise, the budget won't be approved. The next story is called New Hire. Back in the day, I worked as an IT manager for a design group for 25 years. The group specialized in designing integrated circuits. An incredibly smart bunch of people. My job was to keep the computers, networks, and design software running smoothly for about 400 people. At least once a year, we'd get a new college graduate who made my job challenging with their endless demands. I always gave them 3 months to settle in and adjust to the environment before expecting them to understand how things worked. One particular new hire stood out by going above and beyond and making things unnecessarily difficult. By the 3-month mark, I had reached my limit. I politely but firmly told him that from then on, he needed to run all his requests, whether for hardware, software, or assistance, through his boss before coming to me. After that, his boss started CCing me on his responses to those requests. Most of the time, they were a simple no, or ask one of the more experienced designers to help. I walked by a few times and overheard him complaining to his teammates, only for them to laugh and tell him he needed to learn the ropes. It took about 9 more months, but eventually he humbled himself and came to me with a sincere apology. I'll admit, it was a pretty satisfying moment. We ended up becoming friends, and he went on to achieve some impressive design successes. It's always great to see growth like that. The third story is called The Secretary. Many years ago, when manufacturing was a big industry in our area, my husband worked as the warehouse and shipping supervisor for a small manufacturer. This was back in the day when computers were primarily used for business purposes, and printers still churned out reports on green and white striped paper. At the time, having a printer for making shipping labels was a huge upgrade, as they previously had to be written by hand. However, setting up the label printer was tricky. You had to input the label size and alignment manually, and my husband was the only one in the warehouse who knew how to use it properly. One day, my husband decided he'd had enough of being treated poorly by management. He found a new job and handed in his notice. While doing so, he advised the plant manager, let's call him Bob, to train someone else on the label printer before his departure. Bob brushed him off. saying it wasn't a priority, so my husband dropped the subject. Less than an hour later, Bob returned and informed him that his employment was ending immediately. No problem. My husband left and stopped by his new workplace on the way home, where they agreed he could start in 3 days. By the time my husband got home, there was already a message from Bob on our answering machine. Turns out, no one could figure out how to work the label printer. Instead of calling Bob back himself, my husband let me, his secretary, handle the situation. I called Bob right before his scheduled end of the workday to negotiate terms. I proposed that my husband could come back temporarily to train someone, but it would cost $100 an hour. We thought it was just a fun joke, but Bob was desperate and said he'd check with the owners. Bob ended up staying late at work that day, and not long after, he called back with a counter-offer of $15 an hour, slightly more than my husband's usual wage. I politely declined and told him I'd run it by my husband. 10 minutes later, I called back and countered with $90 an hour. This negotiation went back and forth for over an hour. Meanwhile, my husband was laughing so hard at the situation every time I hung up. Finally, we settled on $35 an hour with a 2-hour minimum. They were in a bind and needed labels printed for the next day. My husband went in, spent less than 30 minutes teaching Bob how to use the label printer, and earned $70 for his trouble. It was the easiest money he'd ever made. The next story is called Not Fun. Today at work, my microwave broke, so I quickly went to the cafe next to my office to grab something to eat. After returning and eating, I accidentally left my wallet in the kitchen. About an hour later, a colleague, let's call her Stella, mentioned with a smirk if I had forgotten my wallet. At first I was about to thank her for reminding me, but then she added with a laugh that someone had thrown it in the garbage. I panicked. My wallet had all my documents, tickets and payment cards in it. Thankfully it turned out she was joking. It was still on the table, untouched. No one at work ever takes anything, so I wasn't worried about the contents being gone, but I was definitely annoyed by the unnecessary scare. Meanwhile, she was still laughing about her joke. I didn't say anything at the time. I just quietly put the wallet in my bag, sat back at my computer and thought, just wait, you'll need something from me soon enough. As luck would have it, I didn't have to wait long. Just a few minutes later, she asked me if I could swap shifts with her. She wanted me to take her afternoon shift, so she could work in the morning instead. I kept a straight face and pretended to carefully check the schedule. I even picked up my phone and acted like I was double checking my calendar. After a little pause, I told her, unfortunately I can't. I have a dental appointment I can't reschedule. She sighed heavily and went back to her computer. And all she had to do was not be mean-spirited. The last story is called Nerd Revenge. This happened years ago. I worked for a mid-sized software company and became skilled at integrating our traditional software with newer platforms and components. During one project, I developed a technique that significantly improved the integration process. After the project's success, I created a detailed plan to make this integration method a core feature of our products. I explained that it could become a key differentiator, allowing our traditional products to integrate seamlessly with newer platforms. At the time, a significant portion of the company's revenue came from existing customers who relied on those traditional products. Unfortunately, when I presented the idea, the young CIO and his team dismissed me outright. They insisted no one wants to do that. So I went back to my regular work and quietly started exploring new opportunities. I wasn't in a rush, but eventually I was hired by a company that saw the potential in application integration and valued those skills. Fast forward about 3 years, and I got a call from one of my former managers, just for a chat, or so I thought. Almost immediately, he said, I know why you really left. It turned out that the company had hit a rough patch. Revenue had plummeted because they had fully committed to a new product line while neglecting their existing customers and products. In a big meeting to brainstorm solutions, everyone was given a packet containing a new proposal. One focused on integrating the new product line with the older offerings. Here's the kicker. It was my original plan, the same one I'd written years earlier. Not only had the CIO used my plan in his Save the Company pitch, but he hadn't even removed my watermark with the date or my name. By this point, the document was 5 or 6 years old. I couldn't help but laugh as my former manager shared this. He then asked, "You wouldn't want to come back to work for us, would you?" Apparently he'd been tasked with reaching out to me to try to tempt me into returning. We both had a good laugh. He mentioned he was planning to retire soon, but figured this was worth a call. It was a bittersweet moment. I'd worked with some truly wonderful people there, and many of them were deeply affected by the downturns, layoffs, and ultimately, the company's demise. What had once been a thriving organization with great potential had sadly fallen apart. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. And if you have time, watch another one of my videos. Also, if you want to support me further, check out the channel membership or Patreon. And now, I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye bye.